I think it was just a mixture of orchestral knowledge and the way that the structure of music works with this love of blues. I think two together gave you Jon Lord.
There once was a woman, a dreams kind of woman.
I think he's the only person ever to have an album in the equivalent rock charts and the classical chart at the same time, isn't he?
We couldn't read music, we couldn't really play, and we thought we were actually the bee's knees playing the piano. We thought it was wonderful, but Jon had got this knack. You could tell there was something there.
One of the last things he said in that interview was that he was just a lad from Leicester whose father had sent him for piano lessons.
This is the story of Jon Lord, founding member of Deep Purple. The man who put the rock into the Hammond organ and made it growl. The musician who mixed classical with rock and became a classical composer in his own right.
The love of what Buddy Holly represented and the love of what the Halley Orchestra represented has defined my musical life.
This is De Montfort Hall, and it's amazing to think when you look at such a fantastic looking building that this was actually one of the great rock and roll venues of all time, and I believe still is. It was important for every rock and roll musician to play this venue. It was especially important to Jon, and I know this because we spoke shortly before he became ill about De Montfort Hall. Obviously being from Leicester, this was where he saw his first shows, where he came to concerts, and where of course he played on numerous occasions.
We used to come over to my parents' house here and we used to play the piano together. Although we couldn't play at all, we thought we were actually the bee's knees. His aunt taught him the piano, and so that was it. The rest is history, really.
I think I was always good at playing the piano. My dad was musical, and he saw, I think, something in me. And my first piano teacher did too, said, you know, yeah, this little lad has it.
Leicestershire's Public Record Office gives us a clue as to why Jon became a musician.
If you look at his actual marks for his O-level in 1957, they're not great until you get to music, where he's got 75, so maths 40, history 39. The music really stands out. He's in the orchestra, he's in the choir, he's playing the organ, there he's playing the drums.
But no matter how hard I try.
The head of his old school wasn't very helpful when Jon decided to leave Leicester. He wanted to go to college in London to train to be an actor, but the reference he got was a stinker. J.D. Lord was a boy whose academic progress and results were most disappointing.
They're a bit, they
Snotty.
suggest, snotty. They suggest that he might go somewhere like RADA that selects people on less academic grounds.
You see, that's what's so wrong. As I say, I know an awful lot of people who became musicians, went to various colleges and further education in music, and it wasn't because they were not academically clever, it's just because their life just went into music. Jon came third in piano. Third? 1 and 2 must have been good. So this is the school where Jon went. It's got a different name now and also a lot of new buildings. This is the only bit really that remains that Jon would recognise, which is actually behind that facade. But it does go to prove that you don't always have to be academically brilliant to have a brilliant career. I think Jon was cleverer than his results actually showed. It was just that he spent all his time doing music. And the De Montfort Hall was the place to see it. Jon saw his father play saxophone here. He also came to see the Halley Orchestra and then Buddy Holly.
Oh, well, I love you, gal, yes, I love you, Peggy Sue.
So it was what happened on this stage that helped launch Jon's career. In London at the start of the 60s, Jon earned a crust playing the keyboards in pubs and as a session player. By 1963, he was in the Art Woods, led by Ronnie Wood's brother, Art. Underrated and now very collectible, they split.
I first met Jon when I was in my first semi-pro band, and we opened for them some gig when he was in the Art Woods, and I was 15 years old or something, and they just had their I Take What I Want hit. He was always very, very gentle, very smooth, very kind. And when we'd done the rehearsal, it was John and Richie came out and said, "Well, that's great, man, you got the job."
Deep Purple formed in 1968. The first lineup was finding its way musically, influenced by the American band Vanilla Fudge. It was in the States that they had their first big hit.
So John's comprehension of what music should do and how it should work against Richie's just basic feel and drive.
Yeah.
The counterbalance worked really great.
'68, I think it was, I went out and bought Shades of Deep Purple, which was the album with the original Deep Purple lineup when there was Rod Evans, Nick Simper, Richie Blackmore, Ian and Jon. And if you listen to what Jon did with just the Leslie and the organ at the beginning of Help, they did a copy of the Beatles' Help, a cover of it. I mean, no one ever done things like that before. He was so way ahead of his time, he didn't want to sound like everybody else.
Jon's orchestral and classical thing started coming through, and so well, let's use this intro for that. But it was a period of searching for what we really had to be through nature, rather than what we thought we wanted to be.
Yeah.
Cerebrally, you know.
Just like this wonderful Taylor's original organ, Jon had a most amazing original Hammond organ sound, and it wasn't actually until about 5 years ago that I sort of asked him, I said, how exactly did you go about doing it? And he just said one of his big problems, which was a problem of all Hammond organ players back in the 60s and the early 70s, was of being heard, because you had Leslie cabinets and they were great if you were in a room on your own, but when you've got a band, and certainly somebody like Richie Blackmore playing at full volume, you couldn't be heard. So initially the whole sound he got together was born out of the fact, if I'm doing a solo, I want to be heard. Well, if guitars can have boxes to put things, I'll have some as well. And then went direct into an amp, and then the amp from the Leslie and out the back of the Leslie. So we got this sort of almost distorted sound, but it was distorted, and yet it wasn't distorted. It didn't sound uncomfortable. And it was such a great sound that he had, and nobody else ever replicated it.
I kind of barreled the organ around the studio and made it scream and shout and howl, and I was turning it on and off and kicking it, and, as well as, I hope, playing it reasonably well. I had an enormous fun pushing the bounds of the Hammond organ. We did discover this wonderful combination of that Hammond that I've just described and Richie's sound, which I think is the heart of what Deep Purple achieved in the early 70s.
Jon's love of classical music led the second and groundbreaking Deep Purple lineup into the Concerto for Group and Orchestra at the Royal Albert Hall. A fusion of loud rock and classical, which was new to most ears. It really raised the band's profile.
For the thousands of people who packed the Royal Albert Hall that night, it was a unique occasion. One which brought together two worlds of music, symphony and pop. One of Britain's most distinguished composers, Malcolm Arnold, conducted the combined musical forces of the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra and the Deep Purple in the first performance of the Concerto for Group and Orchestra. It was written by Jon Lord, who founded the Deep Purple group and whose vocalist is Ian Gillan.
I feel
composing something, it's almost like playing something. You know, you start, and what you've just done leads on to something else.
The orchestra were, it seems at first, unconvinced by the long-haired pop stars.
John's got his full score there, and there's Malcolm Arnold, the conductor, with his conductor score, and Richie's got his bits, and I come in with this piece of paper about like this, big, torn out of one of those scrapbook things. Yeah. And with great sort of grandeur, I get my music stand and I place I stick it on it with a bit of chewing gum, you know. And I can see the first violinist going, talking, "He can't read music. How is it not going to work?"
Jon Lord believes that the musicianship in pop is getting so good that this kind of cooperation in music can happen more and more often.
There was this belief that we wouldn't be able to play, and it would be a catastrophe, and what the hell were we doing fronting them who were real musicians? That whole, you know, serious musicians against little pop people, you know.
What's it feel like playing with us squares?
Squares? Wrong word. It's great, actually. It's a lot of fun. I mean, the first rehearsal the other day, when we sat down here and was like, looking over there. God knows how many musicians. It's been very exciting.
It has for me.
I hope, you know, the concert itself is as exciting as the rehearsals have been.
It will be more exciting.
First movement. Hang around for 7 minutes. Listen for 3 big bangs, come in with first rock and roll tempo, watch Malcolm stop. And it went, the whole thing went through like that.
John would have appreciated
Oh, John said, "You're not going to believe this."
Is it true, though, at one of the breaks, or just before the performance, you said it would be really helpful if you finished off the lyrics?
He was sort of, he wasn't quite sure what his approach should be to it. So we thought, hang on, let's just make a little story about doing this thing, you know. And it sort of arrived like 35 minutes before, when it was in a form that it would fit.
How shall I know when to start singing my song? What shall I do if the all go wrong? What shall I do?
Unfortunately, for John and for us, it became such big news that people thought that was a new direction for the band. And the idea that it was a one-off, as a little experiment and a labour of love for John, sort of got lost. And we started turning up to places, and we got the orchestra ready. No, we haven't got the orchestra.
John was really clever at being part of a band, part of a unit, and almost in an orchestral manner, which he did with Deep Purple. When he was called upon to solo and really stand out, boy, he did. But when he was called upon to play a supporting role, he was brilliant as well. And I often say to people that the key to a good supporting role sometimes, when you have to do it, is you may not be listening to it, but if you took it away, you'd really notice it wasn't there. What followed was success as a rock band. Smoke on the Water became their signature track. But it was, if the truth were told, a bit of an album filler, and only peaked at 21 on the singles chart.
Warner Brothers took Smoke, edited it down, and that's what did it. Nothing to do with us. I mean, to us, just an album track. But Warner Brothers saw the potential in it.
It's a great riff. I know now why it's popular. When we wrote it, we didn't think it was that good, to be perfectly honest. It's belted out in John's home city at every Leicester Tigers home game.
It's a Leicester anthem. And as soon as that music comes on, the guys switch on and ready for the game.
I was born in Nottingham, and I'm still a Forest supporter. And John? John was a sort of very leisurely Leicester supporter. He took a mild interest. If they lost, he didn't really care, and if he won, he was quite happy.
He never forgot. I mean, he was really proud. He was really proud of his Leicester roots, and he was always happy to speak to the local rag, and that's unusual. You know, you try and do that sometimes with rock stars today, and you know the PR shutters come down.
It was Black Knight which gave Deep Purple their biggest UK singles success, but they were so much more than a singles band.
My mum used to be friends with Miriam, his mum, and they used to communicate quite a bit together, and she used to pass on how John was getting along and how he'd gone into this group, and that's how I knew he'd got on.
Purple were seen as the pioneers of hard rock and heavy metal. They've sold in excess of 100 million albums and were once renowned as the loudest live band in the world. They were, and still are, one of the hardest touring.
I've never heard them, to be honest with you. It's not really my scene as such.
Between 1976 and 1984, Purple had split. John worked on solo projects and was part of Whitesnake before Deep Purple's reformation. In 1999, an anniversary performance of the Concerto at the Albert Hall sparked John's desire for something other than rock. Eventually, he decided he was going to do it full-time.
The Concerto has changed my life in a couple of occasions. You know, 1969, it gave me the knowledge that I could write for orchestra. In 1999, it gave me the realization that there was something else I wanted to do with my life rather than just be a member of Deep Purple. It's been all-consuming.
John fell out of love with being on the road. He couldn't make that hotel time and the travel time work for him to create this other music that he wanted, which was not Deep Purple.
No.
You know, and he made a decision with his heart, not with his head. His head should have stayed with Deep Purple for another few years. But his heart said he needed to go and have the time to write this different music.
The sound of children's voices, especially in a space like this, is absolutely spine-chilling, thrilling sound, and I'm about as happy as a composer can get.
It was interesting to see how John changed from being the rock and roll guy on the road for half the year to being a composer.
I think the only thing we can do is perhaps bring this in a little... Whatever it is. Just bring it in a little slower, I think.
Okay.
Allegro.
A goodbye gig with Purple in 2002 proved to be an emotional send-off. For a moment, the lights went down on his successor, Honorary, and John appeared.
I was in tears. I had a lump in my throat that I couldn't quite swallow down. It was a marvellous, marvellous moment. It was of my own choosing. I mean, I was leaving the band by my own volition. And yet, I didn't want to at that moment, you know. And each time when it got to another number I'd play, and I think, well, I'm never going to play that again. But then at the end of the evening, when we all went to the front of the stage to say thank you, and I suddenly realised that the rest of them had stepped back and left me on my own to take a round of applause, bless them. And I almost didn't make it off stage without just making an utter fool of myself. Right, I'm going to get out your hair. I'm going to gather up my family, like a mother hen.
Right.
And I'll see you at the other end.
Okay.
In Bocca Lupo, my friend.
Yes.
Jon was the classical composer he had perhaps always really wanted to be. But something more familiar was never far away. So the school actually kept this, did they?
Yeah, this is the school record.
And then they passed it. They passed it over to you,
yes,
did they?
Yeah.
Oh, how wonderful!
Took part in a play in 1957.
You're going to tell me he was Juliet. I never ever saw him dress up in women's clothing.
Never, not.
You're going to tell me he did. What did he do?
1957 at Christmas.
Right.
Very festive, very topical,
So
since we might have found
16,
Richard.
16 or 17, wouldn't he have been?
And let's see if you can find him.
Oh, it was the Duchess of York. He did dress up in women's clothing. So have you got a picture of him? Let's have a look at this.
Yes.
Like really close. I would have said that was Jon.
That one.
I would have said that was Jon. So we're only talking like 11 years later. He forms one of the biggest rock bands in the world with Richie. And I'm sure it wasn't something they discussed over a pint, saying, by the way, did you know I played the Duchess of York in Richard III? So I just find that absolutely fantastic. Oh, I can't wait to tell the rest of Purple. I wanted to know if you knew about his connection with the Duchess of York at all.
No.
You didn't know about his connection with the Duchess
No.
of York? Well, I'm going to show you a picture.
All right.
We did find he had taken part in one particular play, and I'd just like to show you him here. He is the Duchess of York. Is that fantastic or what?
In his earlier life, that was, his first love was, if he wasn't going to be a musician, was to be an actor. He went to...
Or an actress.
Or an actress in this case, yeah. He went to drama school and all that stuff. But that didn't work out, and he had to make ends meet by playing blues piano.
Yeah.
And he found it was really where nature was taking him,
Well,
but that's a great
isn't
insight.
that brilliant?
Can I look at it again?
Yeah.
It's just glorious.
In 2011, we got to play together for the first time. We wrote this piece together, and it was so easy. It was so easy to write. It was just fantastic. Later that month, Jon became Dr. Jon. That stage at the De Montfort Hall in Leicester beckoned once more.
I present to you Jon Douglas Lord, that you may confer upon him the honorary degree of Doctor of Music.
He played here with Deep Purple and Whitesnake. This time, a different performance was required.
I was at Wiggiston Boys, that side of the park. My grandfather lived in an apartment just up the road here. This town was, and still is, deep inside my bones. And it's a huge, huge privilege and an honor to come back here and accept this honorary degree. I'm almost, not quite, but almost beyond words.
It was his last public appearance. Jon discovered he was ill with cancer. Work continued in the studio, putting the finishing touches to a reworking of the Concerto for group and orchestra. A week before he died, he gave his last interview to the Leicester Mercury's Lee Marlowe, who was also writing for Classic Rock magazine.
We spoke over the phone. It was an hour and a half, nearly 2 hours interview. He was in really good form, fine fettle.
Did you know him before?
Yeah, I mean, I'd interviewed him. This was an interview for Classic Rock. I'd interviewed him 5, 6, 7 times, I think, for the Leicester Mercury. At the root of everything was the fact that he was a proud working class lad from Leicester, and he'd led this fantastic life, a life that few of us can really dream about. But he came back, and one of the last things he said in that interview was that He was just a lad from Leicester whose father had sent him for piano lessons, and he was forever grateful for that. And you think, you know, really humble, lovely thing to say, which was, you know, just typical of the man, really. He was, you know, he was fiercely intelligent, he was charming, and he was thoroughly decent, but he wore it all really lightly, you know, and he was a dream to interview from a journalist's point of view, but he was more than that. He was just a decent bloke.
If he wanted something, he would just go for it, and he would just nix anything outside that. This is what I want to do. Sometimes it'd be musical, sometimes it'd be personal, but he was an incredibly stubborn bloke. But with that stubbornness, there was all this great sense of charm and gentleness, you know. There really wasn't a nasty bone in his body, and you can't say that about many people.
Yeah, see, that would be nice.
My sadness is, you know, the music, the legacy he's left. What he wasn't able to leave is the sadness for me.
And piano, if possible, just like, yes.
I suppose it came to me at John's funeral, where I had the privilege of speaking, and I knew that John still had so much music. My God, he had so much music that he was in the middle of, that he was preparing, that he wanted to do work with other people, including the pair of us working together. And I couldn't help but sit there and go, what have we missed? But then, of course, you can temper that with, look what he's left.
Yeah, look at the 40 years of it.
It's unbelievable what he's left. I mean, covering everything from real hard rock to, you could almost say, pure classical music in many genres. I can see people in 100 years' time checking out John. This is a sculpture, and a very fitting sculpture to a lady called Lois Birch. Obviously, you can see the cello. It's a very fitting classical memory of her. My only thing is that I would like to see next to it a Hammond organ with the name Jon Lord written on it, because I think that would be a very fitting tribute. And he loved his classical music, and I'm sure Lois wouldn't mind. Just here, nice Hammond C3 done in beautiful sculpture with John behind with a nice plaque underneath. Yeah, I think that would balance out extremely well. Yes, what a fitting tribute that would be.
You know, if you had your time sort of over again, what do you think you'd like to do?
Be a rock musician, I guess. Can't think of anything better to do. Maybe a concert pianist, but I think the hard work would put me off. Before I get 8 hours a day, I wouldn't care to practice that. No, I'd be a rock musician. I loved it. Every minute of it so far.
John, thank you very much.
Thank you.
It doesn't matter if it's Elgar, Bach, Led Zeppelin, or the Eurovision Song Contest. It's all music.